Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. I hope you are as excited as I am to be attending another Power to Fly Chat and Learn session. My name is Meg Alexander. I'm part of Power to Fly's hosting team, and I am so excited to bring you this upcoming conversation with Guilherme, Cristina, and Jamar from Murmuration. Now, before we dive in here, I just want to go through a couple quick housekeeping items. Some really simple rules so that we can make sure that this is a safe and comfortable space for anyone. And hopefully these will help whether today is your first Power to Fly event, in which case, hi, welcome, we're so happy to meet you. Or maybe this is your 500th Power to Fly event. And if that's the case, welcome back. We're happy to see you again. Now, first off, I want to encourage all of you to participate. You can turn your cameras on if you'd like, drop your name and where you're calling from in the chat box. I'm really always eager to see where our community is located. I'm coming to you from Toledo, Ohio. This is land that belonged to the Fox, Kickapoo, and Potawatomi tribes in my area. So if you know whose land you're on, please feel free to share it in the chat and let us know how far you are chiming in from. Ooh, we've got Barbados covered for sure. And I know, ooh, we've got London. Dang, y'all are starting off the bat like far flung. I'm loving this. All right, the other thing I want to remind y'all of is today's conversation is being recorded. So you don't have to take notes, you get to just sit back and enjoy. You can expect to receive a rewatch email from Power to Fly in about 2 to 4 business days. And it's going to have a link to where you can rewatch this recording when it's posted on our website. Now, just know that if you are on camera and come off mute at any point, you will show up on the recording and the live stream today. So as long as you are making sure that you do not come off mute, you won't show up whether your camera is on or off. So in case you have privacy concerns, hopefully that'll help allay some concerns there. If you have any further questions on this, please feel free to email me, or not email me, I'm sorry, DM me in the chat. I'm happy to help fill you in. Now, I do want to encourage y'all to share any questions that you might have in that chat box in Zoom. We'll be going through those. I'll have my eye in the chat the whole time. And we would love to try and answer not only the questions that y'all submitted prior to today's session, but if there's something you want us to go deeper in depth on during the talk today, we would absolutely love to know about it. So let us know. If you want to remain anonymous, but you still want your question asked, that is not a problem. Just DM me, Meg Alexander. You'll find my name in the drop-down menu, and I'm happy to ask the question on your behalf. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we have special guests from Murmuration, which is a Power to Fly partner. Now, Murmuration is on the mission of transforming the politics of public education through data and technology. The team at Murmuration believes that the power of data can inform decisions, help build deep understanding over time, and drive actions that put their partners and the sector as a whole in the greatest position to succeed. And this is cycle over cycle, year over year. Now, the Murmuration team includes experts and innovators in data, analytics, technology, as well as strategy. They are former teachers, organizers, data scientists, nonprofit execs, and political campaign veterans with diverse backgrounds, but all of whom have the same goal. Now, if you would like to join the team at Murmuration, I really encourage you to check out their company page at powertofly.com. It's going to look much like what you're seeing in front of you here. You can apply to open roles there. You can learn more about the company. And then if you click events, you can take a look at events that they have partnered on with us in the past, as well as if they have any upcoming events scheduled that they'll be participating in with us. So I definitely recommend you check that out. We just put a link in the chat thread to their company page directly. All right, now I'm very excited to introduce you to our speakers. So first up, we have Guilherme Ferreira. So Guilherme, or Guy for short, is a lead data engineer at Murmuration, and he focuses on designing, building, and maintaining multiple big data pipelines that process their partners' data. Now, with his career spanning multiple roles in startups and big companies, Guy now uses his data and software experience to help Murmuration's partners provide children across the US with equal access to high-quality public education. Guy, we're so happy to welcome you to the stage today. Is there anything else you want our audience to know about you before we keep going?
Not much. Thank you, Meg, and thanks Power to Fly to having us all. Very excited to share what I know with everyone. Originally from Brazil, hence the different name, but I moved to the US about 7 years ago, so I've experienced working in different countries. Yeah, excited to meet everyone.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Guy. All right, joining Guy from Murmuration is Cristina Lamas. Now, as the Director of Strategic Operations at Murmuration, Cristina drives strategic alignment through annual planning, organizational metrics, project management, and knowledge management. Now, she has grown her career for over 10 years at fast-growing, mission-oriented organizations. And Cristina is passionate about creating a more equitable world through technology and politics. Cristina, I'm so excited to welcome you to the stage. Is there anything else you'd like to add today?
Yeah, thank you for the intro. I'll add, I've been at Murmuration for almost 6 years. So I don't know if that is testament to anything about Murmuration, but it is a great place to be. And I'm just really happy to be here today and sharing a little bit more about my career growth and trajectory. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cristina. All right, rounding out the Murmuration pack today is Jamar Wilson. Now, Jamar enjoys providing both technical and strategic support to people and organizations to spark their political plans. Now, as the Director of Organizing and Advocacy Partnerships at Murmuration, Jamar gets to work directly with organizing and those advocacy partners to help achieve their campaign goals. Jamar has spent his entire career working in K-12 education as a teacher, special education administrator, and a community organizer. He even ran for school board in New Orleans using Murmuration's campaign tools because he knew how much we needed school board members that had actual experience working in public education. How shocking, right? You want people that are making the laws about what you're talking about to know what they're talking about. So yeah, very, very excellent. Jamar, is there anything else that we should know about you before we dive into questions today?
Just thankful to be here, share some expertise and knowledge with everybody. I don't think anything else right now, but I'm sure a lot is going to come out in our conversation.
Excellent. I cannot wait. All right, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into today's topic about how to make your resume stand out. So let's get started with the questions that you all submitted ahead of time. Now, just a quick reminder, this does not mean you are prevented from asking questions right now. If you want to dive in deeper on a subject, let us know in the chat. If you want me to ask a question or make a comment and keep you anonymous, let us know in the chat. Even if you don't have questions, we want to know how you're feeling about all this. Are your lived experiences different? Or if we're going over one of your questions and you think there's some more detail or context we should know, share it in the chat. You can always share, public is always best. That way we can interact with each other, but no worries. Y'all are more than welcome and very much encouraged to participate via DM if that is more comfortable for you. All right, so this first question I'm going to pose to all three of you. This one wants to know, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had received during the early stages of your career? So let's get started here. Guy, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm actually just thinking about this question. And one thing I would say, and I wish I'd known further ahead in my career or further earlier, don't stress too much. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Don't worry that others may be advancing further. There will always be a high school or college classmate who is already way further in their career. That's good for them. Focus on yourself. Don't try to compare yourself to others because they are different people. Just see what you want to achieve and what you need to get to where you want to be. And always just think about the next step. Don't think about, oh, I want to be CEO. How do I get there? For me, just think about where I am now. Maybe I'm a junior engineer. Maybe I just graduated out of college. What's the next step? How do I get there? And once you're there, then you worry about the future. For now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Just focus about the next step and the rest will fall in place.
I like that. It's very good advice, trying to keep it, keep your focus tight. And that way you don't get lost in all of the myriad of different options and different ways that you could be achieving your goals or different goals that maybe you should have instead. And, exactly. I think that's a really good one. Cristina, do you agree with this? Is this, kind of refocusing and trying to just look at the next step ahead of you? Is this advice that you wish you had gotten, or would maybe different advice been more helpful for you?
Yeah, I think, loved everything about that. I agree 100%. I think early on in my career, I was like, here are all the big things I'm going to do. I'm going to open my own school and I'm going to just focus on that. Right. And now I can tell you, I have no desire in opening a school, although I think that's amazing for anyone who wants to do it. But I would have struggled to try to meet that goal early on because that's what I thought I had to do. And I just love the idea of focus on your next step. And will echo that comparing yourselves to others, I think, can ultimately lead you down the wrong path if you're not really tapped into what it is that you want to do for yourself or what you yourself are interested in. What's that one project that you really liked that you're I want to learn more about how to do that specific thing, or how do I how do I make sure that that specific type of thing is more in my roles and responsibilities as I go on to like my next role or my next project. So yeah, I agree. Like cutting your things into pieces and focusing on the short-term goals really, really do matter.
I really liked what you said about trying to make sure that the goals you're aiming for are the ones you actually want to reach. I think there's probably, I can't imagine I'm the only one in the room that's felt like this, where you're working towards something and you're working, and then you finally have a chance to take a breath or look, like step back from it. And that for me is when I always knew like, oh, this isn't really what I want to be doing, because I would feel so lost of like, why am I doing this? I'm in the middle of this. I'm in the trenches. Do I actually care? And it took like really finding something that I gave a crap about to make me realize like, oh, no wonder I had such a hard time chasing those goals. I didn't actually want that. That's what I thought I was supposed to want. That's what I thought the benchmark was. So yeah, I think that's wonderful. Jamar, did you have this as well? Have you had to, reevaluate the steps in your plan, or, what advice would have been helpful to you or most helpful to you when you were starting out?
Yeah, I mean, echo what has already been said. Definitely, as you kind of saw earlier, I've done a few different things in the world of K through 12 education. I think one of the pieces of advice that I wish I had known earlier was like, utilize your manager. I think like coming out of college, it was like, oh, this person's my boss. Like I can't talk to them about anything. I can't ask them for a very specific thing. It's like I'm just doing what they tell me to do. And I wish I would have known earlier that, oh, I can like come to my boss like with a concern, or my manager like with a potential plan, or come to them for advice. And it doesn't have to be, feel like a top-down thing. It can be a more collaborative thing, or something where you're as someone who's being managed is getting what you need out of it just as much as the person who's managing is. So I think that would have been so helpful early in my career to avoid some pitfalls.
Yeah. That's a good one. I feel like you're right. There are a lot of people that don't know how to really maximize their manager, because I feel like a lot of us were never taught, like, here's the kind of things you should get from a manager, right? Like management skills are taught when you're trying to be a manager, not when you are trying to be managed. So I think that's a really, I like that call out. Like try and utilize the help available to you and the resources available to you, like right off the bat. I think that's great. All right, we're going to keep moving with our questions. If y'all want us to dive in deeper on something, or if you have a separate question, please, again, feel free to ask. We've got a little over 45 minutes left in our chat today. And then I'm just going to remind our speakers here, I don't want to call on y'all if you don't really want to answer. So as we go through here, if you want to raise your hand, awesome. And that way I will make sure that I'm not pressing people for answers if they're like, no, I'll sit this one out. I've talked enough. Okay, so let's talk self-advocacy. I want to know what you think it looks like, if you have any strategies on how to advocate for yourselves, especially in a remote environment. So to kick us off here, like what does effective self-advocacy look like for each of you? Let's see who wants to get us started here. How about Cristina? You want to go?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think one thing that is really important in self-advocacy is keeping track of the things you've done well. That means write it down, like literally keep receipts of all the things you've done really well. I think in a remote world, there's like the thing that we're starting to hit up against is both it's hard to get good instant feedback because your managers aren't seeing that in the moment. So requesting that feedback and being very intentional is very important, not just like the things that you did really well, but also in the ways that you want to grow. And I think like that also stands out for managers, that like you're asking about things that you're like, I just did this presentation, or I just, put out this deliverable, like, please give me feedback on this. So being very intentional about requesting that feedback, but then also keeping notes. So when you do those end of year, mid-year reviews, those performance reviews, you have something to look back on to remind you of like the moments that you did something you were really proud of.
I like that. I had an old boss, she's not a great manager in a lot of ways, but one of the really great things I learned from her was to keep a kudos folder. So in my email, in my desktop, in my email on the inboxes, I have a separate file that is like a label kind of thing that I can attach to whatever emails. So that way, like if I get nice praise from a client after a chat, or if, somebody writes in saying they really enjoyed an event we hosted or whatever, I can just throw that kudos label on it, even if it's like a giant thread. And that way later on, if I want to go back And sometimes I use it for, for review, for yearly reviews and that kind of thing. But sometimes literally it's just the fuel when I'm having a really bad day. And I'm like, I don't think I'm very good at this. And what am I doing here? What am I like? Somebody else could be doing this way better, blah, 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 like all of that stuff. So I think that's really good to keep track of the feedback, especially on the good stuff. It's really easy for some of us to kind of let that roll off and like, you don't want to, I don't know, taking compliments is hard. Jamar, do you agree with this? Like, does self-advocacy look like that for you, or do you struggle with self-advocacy in a different way?
No, I think it definitely looks like that, of in some other ways as well, of like asking for the support that you need. And also like, don't be afraid to brag on yourself. Even I think not only like to your manager, but like to other people in the organization as well. I think sometimes we forget that like there are people in the organization who will like be your cheerleader who aren't your manager. So don't be afraid to like go and have that coffee chat with some other director, some chief level person, depending on how your organization is set up, and talk about some of the work that you're doing, some of the things that you're proud of that goes beyond your manager, because you never know who's going to talk about you in a positive way, and different types of meetings and different types of settings that might open up different opportunities for you within the organization. So I would say like go even beyond your manager and don't be ashamed of like talking about yourself. It's a good thing to like talk about yourself in the workplace and like things that like you're proud of and that you're enjoying and that you've accomplished.
I like that. I mean, if you are talking about the things not only that you've accomplished, but also the things that you enjoy doing, that's how you get more work like that, is by saying, hey, this is my jam. I really enjoy this. If you have more projects like this, I'd love to stretch my skills in that area.
Right, because people are going to like, bring you onto more projects if they don't. You might have done a good job, but if someone doesn't know like, oh, you really enjoyed this work, let me pivot you over in this way, people won't know that. So yeah, super important to talk about like what you actually enjoy, not just like what you accomplished.
Oh yeah. Yes. 100%. I mean, truly, y'all, I started out as a talent advocate for Power to Fly, and I was asked to host one of these because somebody was going to be out of town. And I was very vocal after I was done about like how much fun that was. And I really enjoyed it, thinking like, now I'll get to step in when people are sick or whatever. And within about a month, I was doing this all the time. So like, obviously, results may vary, but like, I think that's a really good point here. Guy, I had a question for you on this. Do you think that self-advocacy is any different or needs to look any different if you are in a remote environment versus people who are in the office, might be able to grab a cup of coffee at the break area with the person they want to talk to and maybe not have to make it so formal? What does this look like for you in like when you're talking in a remote environment?
Yeah, definitely. And for many of us, the remote world changed a lot. And especially since, even though it's been a few years, we're all still adjusting to our remote world, because many of us spent 10, 15, 20 years working in an office environment, and now we're all remote. It does change a lot, especially if you are more an introvert or a shy, timid person. It can be very hard to be vocal about yourself. So I think I fully agree, these are all great tips. It can be very hard, I am a shy person, admit, to even think about all the things you did and to self-advocate and to self-promote yourself to the company and to your boss. So I think being in a remote first world really changes that a lot, because if you're just having a face-to-face conversation, that can feel more organic, because a lot of times you can be just like you mentioned, you're having a coffee or a water, whatever, just walking around with a coworker, and then you can just bring it up a project you did. So those organic conversations, they don't happen anymore in a remote first world. So you really have to take charge of yourself, of your career, of your projects, and be able to promote yourself on these I call them inorganic conversations. For instance, this is an inorganic conversation because we're not all in a room. We cannot see each other's facial expressions. I don't know if how you're reacting to my advice or whatnot. So you really have to trust yourself, trust your gut, and step out of the comfort zone. It's very easy to just stay in your comfort zone. I've done that before, and I wish I hadn't. But yeah, it really is. The remote world provides a lot of great benefits, but also provide challenges. So it's up to each and all of us how to overcome these challenges and make them into advantages for us.
Yeah. Okay. We got a really good question anonymously in the chat thread. I want to touch on this before we go into our next question. This person said, I love this idea of talking about yourself. I've also read others write about me and have experienced it myself, where women, especially Black women and women of color, are seen as bragging, and it annoys people in the office when they promote themselves, including managers who might prefer they be self-depreciative or humble. So let's talk about that balance. It can be very hard to feel like you are not bragging about yourself in a negative capacity. Let's see, Cristina, do you have any secrets for how you balance this? As women, I think we know that there's a lot more scrutiny and focus done when someone is promoting themselves as a female in this industry, depending, obviously where you might be located. How do you kind of thread that needle?
Yeah. I mean, first I will highlight that, as women of color, there is obviously something different about it, but once you dig into the differences between even me being Latina versus being a Black woman, those lived experiences are very different. So I can't speak to the lived experiences of Black women and how that feels in talking about yourself or bragging about yourself. I think, more generally speaking, yes, it is a balancing act of you managing white dominant culture and what is expected of you as someone who is not a member of the white dominant culture, but then also leaning in a little bit. I would say if you catch moments like that where it feels like someone is calling out that you might seem braggy, or you might seem like you are, I don't know what other words have been used, but many different words, bossy, all these different terminology that get used specifically for women, and even more broadly for women of color. But I would say if you're comfortable, start calling things like that out. I think as you grow in your career and you become a director level, a VP level, a chief level, whatever it is, other women of color are looking to you to call out those moments, right? So, as you grow, start to do that as well. Call it out to people that you feel comfortable calling it out to. Say it to your manager. If that is a relationship you feel comfortable, find someone within the organization that you feel comfortable saying those things to. But I think the more that you call out an experience where you're I'm doing something that seems very normal for my white colleague to be doing, that for some reason I am getting backlash on, say it, because once you say it, then people can reflect a little bit and be oh yeah. And that is ultimately the culture we want to create, right? We want to create a culture where, people of all backgrounds and experiences from top to bottom can brag on themselves and feel good about it and not feel like they're receiving something different from a different type of colleague.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Granted, I don't have a lot of the intersectionalities here that make this question so interesting and really specific. But I know that for me, I'm way more comfortable with self-deprecation. If I can make you laugh at something about me before anybody else has a chance to, that's, whatever, Psych 101, rearing its ugly head. But I had good results with starting from purely factual. I am proud of that project. I did my best work there. It was tricky and I learned so many new things because I failed a lot during the project, but that's why I'm happy I did it. Trying to go back to things that were facts that weren't really disprovable by other people somehow, that made me feel better, and less awkward when I started it. Guy, did you do this too?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same comment that you just did. Obviously, I'm an engineer and a very analytical person. The way I see this is it's simple data. It's not bragging if it's a simple piece of information. If I did well on this project, if I saved the company money, if I made something more performant, I'm not bragging. It's just a fact of life. I did good work. It's a fact. You can disagree. It doesn't matter. It's still a fact. Also, one more thing that can help with the whole bragging thing, ask a coworker. Ask somebody you trust, a team member that actually understands your work, understands your position, and see, what do you think about my role in this project? Do you think I did a good job? Do you think I did a great job? If it's someone you do trust and you have some level of intimacy, hopefully they will say, oh yeah, I think you did good, or you did amazing. You should write a blog post about it. You should write a magazine about it. So really is, and I agree with Meg, I also tend to self-deprecate myself a lot because it's easier. But a lot of times others can and will be willing to hype us up, to lift us up. So if we can find those allies, they will be a great source of confidence and to let us understand if we're just bragging about something that doesn't really Makes sense? Or if you're, again, just stating a statistic, I did a really good job and other people should know about it.
I like this. Ooh, I like this a lot. Okay. All right. So one of the things we had talked about was setting those goals for yourself, right? And trying to figure out what you want, where you are actually trying to go, what your next step is to get there. So I want to know, do y'all set yearly goals like for yourself? How do you go about identifying aggressive but achievable goals? I think this one is one that I super struggle with. Let's start there, and then we'll talk a little bit more about communication of those goals. So Jamar, how about you? Do you set like yearly goals? Is this something that you sit down to think about? Or is it maybe less formal of an action for you?
Yeah, it's something that I've done more as I've gotten further along in my career. Like, yeah, we're setting goals for like, you're like for your, if you like manage a team, like work with other people, things like that. But actually setting goals for you as an individual is like a really like, for me, a meaningful part of like how I think about like my own development. And I think at the beginning of my career, it was like letting other people set goals for me. But once I started like think about like, okay, this year or like this quarter or over the next 6 months, this is specifically what I would hope to learn. Something that's actually going to push me, whether it is related to like a big project that I'm working on, or something that's a little tangential that like, I just want to pick up this new skill over the next 6 months. And maybe it's related to work I'm currently doing. Maybe it's related to something I want to do in the future, over the next year or so. But I'm going to like make sure I'm setting this very intentional goal for myself. And then the thing with setting goals is like actually putting aside the time, like put aside that time calendar. For me, it's like calendaring it out on my calendar of like, when am I going to work on this specific thing? I do that for everything, but specifically like for goals you're setting for yourself, especially if it's something that's not as, tangible as like to the rest of your team or like to your manager, like it's something, very specific to you, like make sure you dedicate the time for that. Like, people are going to support you, but like you are going to be your best advocate. You're going to be the person who is going to like do the work and like invest the most. So make sure you actually take the time to set aside to invest in yourself based off of the goals that you're kind of putting out there for your own development.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. You're right. Like nobody's going to be quite as obsessed with your career as you are. So if this is, if your career is something and the goals that you want to reach within it are something that you take very seriously or is a focal point in your life, then yeah, like this needs to be something that you plot out, right? Like people don't hike the Appalachian Trail without ever looking at a map before. So I think it is, really important to remember that, you're kind of in a marathon, right? It's a bit of a sprint, but it's more of a marathon of your career. So how are you planning on going through that? What points are important for you to hit along the way? Because the path that you think you might want to take to, point B might not be the path that's going to happen, and it might not be the easiest path. And you learn that by kind of talking to people about this. So let's talk about if you're trying to communicate these goals to your managers, especially when maybe your goals are not really related to your current role within the org. How do you navigate this? Obviously, nobody wants to go to their boss and be like, I don't want to do my job. I want to do that one. So, how have y'all navigated this in the past? Or do you think that it's important to communicate these goals to your managers? Guy, how about you?
Yeah, I actually have had this happen to me in the past on a previous position. The main thing really is to be polite and direct, and rather than just say, I hate this, get me out of here, which might be your feeling. It really just says, I think my skills are better set for this other position. What do you think about it? Your boss not only is looking out for you as an employee, but also for the organization. If you think you can do better for the organization in a different role, that's in the best interest of your boss, because that will be in the best interest of the organization. And again, even if the role doesn't exist in the company, a lot of times your boss will be your advocate as long as you keep doing your job, because they know that if you're not happy now, you will not be happy in the future. And a lot of times they can see it. Eventually you show up in your productivity, and I'm pretty sure they would rather keep you as an ally, as someone in their network, and look out for you rather than just let you quit out of the blue. So yes, it can be hard to find a boss that you trust, to be open about the fact that you're not super happy in that position. But a lot of times it's not necessarily a problem with the position, it just says, I don't think I'm the best fit for it. My skills just doesn't fit this role, but I think they're better for this other role. What do you think? A lot of times your bosses have much more experience than you. They will understand and they will help you, guide you. Your boss can also be your mentor.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Jamar, what would you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would say, I think when it comes to that point, I think that honesty and transparency is helpful. I think as well, if you're like thinking of like, oh, like I want to try something out, I'm not necessarily ready to like fully leave the role. I think you can also think about, is there a way that you can tie it to some potential future work within the role as well? Of like, hey, like I'm interested in like adding this other skill set. It might be helpful for us down the line, but it's also going to be helpful for me in my career as I'm thinking about it. Especially if you if you built up a relationship with your manager, like the majority of managers are there to like actually support you both in like the short term and long term. Like we've all had managers who weren't that, unfortunately, but in my experience, I think the majority of managers want to support you and like grow you and like keep you at the organization for as long as possible. So if you're coming to them, you're saying like, hey, like I'm thinking of like adding this other skill, or like I want to try this other thing out. Like, is there space I can carve out for a few hours a week to like do this? I kind of lean into like the openness and transparency because again, you never know like what opportunity that could potentially open up with your manager may have insight into another role in another team or like some other project on another team that you might actually be to tap into, that if you hadn't had that conversation with your manager, you might not have been someone who was considered for those different opportunities within the organization.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I liked how you touched on the fact that, we want to try and have these open conversations and this trust with our managers. Ideally, a good manager should want to develop you. And it's always easier to help guide someone who already has that motivation than to try and motivate somebody to do a job they don't want to do. So I think that's a really good point to make, that like not all of us are going to be as lucky as others to have that situation where we are now. But that isn't to say that you then stop asking for the management you want. Sometimes you are there to help teach a manager how to manage someone. So I think that's a really good point to kind of highlight. And you're right, you don't know where something might go. I love, Guy, how you had said that you can touch on the fact that you just might not be the best person for the role, because that is a really good way to make it clear that this is not an emotional choice. This is I don't think I'm the right tool for the job, which again, to me would make it a lot easier, I think, to have that conversation of like, I don't want to do this. And it's not like a petty, I don't want to do this kind of thing. So I think that's a really good thing to remember here. All right, so let's talk about how we can create career plans for ourselves. Now, I know we talked a little bit earlier about like kind of just talking about just looking at the next step in front of you for what you're trying to do. But when do y'all take a step back and look at your whole career? Do you believe in creating an overarching career plan? If you do, let's talk about how we could get started creating our own. Cristina, do you maybe want to touch us off here?
Yeah. I mean, anyone who knows me knows I'm a planner at heart. So I think everything is a plan. I think as I've gotten older, one of the things that has kind of changed in the way I think about career planning is that it is not just a me focused exercise, right? It's like there's more to your life than your job. So when you think about like your growth trajectory, you're also thinking about like, what does your family structure look like? What does your financial structure look like? What does your faith structure look like? All of these things. So it's like, to say it's a career plan, I think is a very limited and narrow perspective of your life. And you should consider all of the things that you want in your life when creating your career plan, because the way you want your family to look, the way you want your finances, your home to look, all of those things impact what the career plan will ultimately look like. And quite honestly, I think has taken a lot of in some ways adds stress, obviously, to the process. In some ways takes some load off of the process, because it isn't just about like gunning for that promotion every 6 months, but it's about thinking about steady growth and stability, and happiness, what truly makes you happy. So yeah, I mean, career planning is, I think, an important part of just life planning. But I would really urge folks to not think about just their career, but think about a holistic perspective of what their future should look like.
I think that's a good point. You know, it really is. It's like how we talk about having a garden, right? If you want a field full of wildflowers, you get to just sit back, let Mother Nature take its course, everything's fine. If what you're going for is like a lovely rose garden, that's not going to happen if you just sit back and hope that, you know, eventually it'll all kind of come together. So I think that that's a really good point of, you know, trying to be intentional, because the time's going to pass anyway, right? Your career is going to pass, the years are going to pass. And if you're not doing what you want with them, it then becomes much more of like a panic feeling, I want to say, once you realize like, oh, I've spent all this time doing something I don't actually want to do. For either Guy or Jamar, oh, go ahead, please, Cristina.
I'll also say, like, I think the reason that it's important to think about these things holistically is it helps you give yourself grace, right? Like if you have a year that from like a personal perspective, there's just a lot happening, give yourself career-wise a little bit of grace.
Yes.
I don't set like very like number goals for my year. I generally set like a theme for my year. So like if it's like a year of peace, then it's a year of peace. If it's a year of growth, then it's a year of growth. But it is like, if you know that a lot of things are happening, try not to make everything happen at once. There's really just like no need for that much to be going on in 1 year.
I like that. That's important. I don't think I'm alone in this, but 2020, a lot of us had, you know, mental health crises. I did, and it led to a big step backwards in my career, but like not backwards in like, oh no, I'm back, blah, blah, blah. But like, no, this just isn't what I need right now. What I need is a little bit more time to focus on whatever's going on up in, you know, the brain that runs my meat suit. So I think it's really a good idea to remember that like your goals might and will flex from time to time as you're checking them. All right, so since we know that change is the only constant, what are some of your tips for maintaining a flexible mindset? You know, it's very easy to come up with a plan and think like, oh yeah, I put all of this work on this plan, it's going to be great, but now I don't really want to change any single bit of it. Jamar, how about you? What do you think, what are some of your tips for maintaining that flexible mindset and really utilizing that to the best of our advantage?
Number one is knowing that any and every plan can fail. You know, it's like going in knowing that like failure is a potential option for a plan, kind of has helped put me more at ease, that, okay, like this might fail, but like what ultimately am I like wanting to get out of like this plan that like I'm doing? For instance, if I start noticing something is like kind of going off track, like not that being a discouraging thing, be like, okay, like what can I learn from this? Like, do I need to make an adjustment? Do I need to make an adjustment to my career? Do I need to make an adjustment to what I'm working on right now? And being okay with that it's so often, I think what I've actually learned over time, and like hope people listening also hear, is that the best moments of growth for me, and I've talked about this like with my own career coach, are in moments where like I failed, or like where a project or something has gone off the rails. Like that is where I've actually learned the most. That's actually helped propel my career and my life in general forward the most, are in those moments where this grand plan that I had went off the rails, and my ability to either get it back on the rails or like make a whole new pathway is what actually pushed me to where I wanted to be. So that's to say, like, it's still super important to have a plan. I think it's I would not advocate just completely going planless. It's hard to kind of get something back on track if it was never on track to begin with. But having that assuredly like, oh, things are going to like happen, and that's okay. And like, what can I learn from this to actually put me in a better position going forward?
Sorry, I lost my mute button there. No, I think that's a really good point. Now, let's talk about in an interview setting. If you are trying to showcase this flexibility as a skill set during the interview, What is the right way to go about doing this? Should you illustrate this when talking about, some experiences in your professional history? Is there a better way we can highlight this for, for hiring managers when we're talking to them?
Yeah, I'll jump in and then I'll stop talking. As someone, I've been hiring people for now 8 years now. Wow, 8 years. Like, I want to hear about people's failures. Like, I learned so much from candidates talking about like a project or something that failed. And even if they like did not like save the project, I want to hear about like what you learned. Like, what did you learn from that actually propelled you and like drove you to like do something different going forward. So cool. Like if you end up turning into like a whole success from like a failure within the project, that's cool. I personally, as a hiring manager, I think other hiring managers care less about like, oh, you turned into like a win for that specific project. And like, what did you do to like make work for yourself and your team better in the long run based off of that failure? So I think it's just really important to be able to grasp onto those things and talk candidly about them, because that just says a lot about you to the hiring manager.
I love that idea of touching on how it's helped the team or how it's impacted the team. I think that's a very good way to not only be bragging or like highlighting good things about yourself, but also showing how those things could apply to you joining this org. What culture gaps you would fill, what ability gaps you might be able to cover there. Tanya is asking in the chat, how do you stay focused on your goal? So let's talk about this in light of, if you have to change the pathway and you're trying to be flexible there, how do you stay focused on the goal when there might be multiple instances where you need to readjust the trajectory or the path you're going to use to get there? Dee, how about you? How do you stay focused on a goal when there's a lot of things along the plan that are changing?
Definitely. One thing that always keeps me checked is to realize that a step back doesn't necessarily mean you have to go back to the beginning of everything. Just everyone has a step back all the time. And to Jamar's point, it is actually helpful to keep in mind and keep in check and bring that up in interview processes, because it helps a lot for interviewers to know that you have had experience before and that you faced this issue before. And to the question's point, how do you keep focused on your goal? Just remember, you fell down once, that's okay. Just get up and keep on moving. A step back just means it's going to take a little longer, and that's okay. I think that the main thing that has helped me is to realize that's okay. The world's going to keep on spinning. Just keep focusing on your goal, and it might take a little longer to get there, and that's okay. You're still going to get there.
I'm very much like that. Going a step backward is not going back to the beginning. That's going to stick with me, y'all. Because you're not, no matter how many steps backwards you're taking, you're still taking all your knowledge with you that you've gleaned from, exactly. If you want to call it failure, then failure. But yeah, I think that's a very good point.
If anything, you just learn from your step back. So you'll avoid a further step back in the future. Yeah,
of course. Cristina, what do you want to add to this?
I think, baby steps are definitely still steps. I would also add that, like, if you have this like deep goal that you need to accomplish, then I think you should always take time for reflection about like what needs to change in order for me to accomplish this goal, right? Because if like there's a bunch of things just getting in the way of accomplishing that goal, that probably means that either a circumstance needs to change, your desire for that goal needs to change. Like, if maybe it's just that like that goal maybe isn't the right goal, right? That could very well be a thing. Maybe the goal needs to change. But I think if it is a goal that you truly, truly want to accomplish, removing those barriers and making like very drastic changes sometimes is the best way to do that, whether it means quitting that job that you don't love and just focusing on that next step. Like, I know it can be a really scary thing. And obviously, like, there has to be a certain situation in place in order for you to be able to make those really drastic steps. But like sometimes that is the best way to get back on track, is just make a really drastic change.
Yeah, I like that. Monica's in the chat saying the same thing. I tell myself baby steps are still steps all the time. Stephanie, I'm loving your comment here. Those are tactical steps back because of the intel you gained from those gleans. So I think that is a very, very good point. It doesn't, just because it's not something that was on the plan does not mean that it's not something that can benefit you in the plan in the long run. I like that a lot. Okay, so let's move on here and let's talk about mentorship. We've talked a little bit about utilizing your managers. and realizing that they can be mentors for you. But what are some of the best ways to connect with potential mentors? How have y'all gone about this in your journey? Have you done it in a like super professional, like formal capacity? Has it been more of an informal thing that, grows organically between yourself and others within the organization? What has mentorship been like in your experience so far? Christina, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, well, I'll touch on the management piece of this. Like to me, my past managers have been generally the people that I tap most for mentorship. And I say this because I'm also very cognizant of like when you're applying for a new job and you're looking for references. As a hiring manager, I want to say like, I want to know that people that have managed you are going to serve as your references. Like that's important to me. I want people that like have actually worked closely with you to also be able to speak to your work. And while you can like list a mentor that has never seen you in a work scenario, that is also a helpful perspective, it is not as helpful as someone who has been able to manage you. The other thing I would say is like, it's really important to make sure that you're diversifying the types of mentors you tap. And that looks like if, you might have a person who connects with you on different life experiences, but maybe they aren't necessarily in the field you want, but they still serve a value, right? Like they still connect with you in these ways. And then maybe you do find a mentor in the field you want, but maybe isn't, connecting with you in those other life experiences ways. But I think it's important to have mentors that come from all aspects of what your identity is so that you can make sure to like grow yourself from all those different parts of your identity.
That's a really good point. Just because somebody is your mentor doesn't mean they're going to be able to address all the questions that you might bring them. So yeah, that is absolutely, that makes tons of sense. Why a more diverse mentorship base, even if it's just diversity in whether people are in your industry or not, whether they are in your position or not, if they've been there before, there's a lot of places that good advice can come from. So I like that idea of opening yourself up to it and not just following one teacher for, the entirety of your career. Anybody else want to jump in here? No worries. If not, we've got plenty of questions to go through.
Just want to say one thing that just crossed my mind. One thing that has always helped me is to not think of a mentorship relationship as a one direction relationship, meaning your mentor can also learn from you. You can also be your mentor's mentor. Meaning just because you might be more junior in your career, you still have experiences that they have not. You still have a fresh set of perspective. So because of that, you're not just taking away information and time, you're also bringing something to the table. So that is what helped the relationship between mentoree to foster and keep growing, because it should be a relationship, a give and take rather than just a take. So don't forget that you also have something to give.
That's a very good call, and definitely something that I struggle with remembering even now. So thank you for that, Guy. All right. So we did have a question come in the chat thread, and this person had wanted to know, when to recognize that it might be time to leave the role you're in. So I want to come at this from a couple different perspectives. If you are thinking you might want to leave the role you're in or leave where you are because you're at an impasse with your manager. So let's say that there isn't that trust there. Are there any ways, have any of y'all had to do this where you've had to kind of take a step back and reevaluate, like, is this going to be productive? Am I going to be able to make this relationship work, or am I not? Has anybody experienced that? I've done it once before, but I'm not the panelist on here. So I want to know from y'all what this has been like, if you've had to consider leaving a role because your manager was not going to give you the help that you needed to keep advancing up the ladder there.
I have, but also I was a little unhappy with the role. But a lot of times you have to realize because the manager also has other priorities, that's not just you. So I think we have touched a lot on the good parts of mentorship and of having a good manager on your side. However, life ain't perfect, and you can be stuck with a manager that is not looking out for you. That happens. If that's the case, then I'd say you should be the one looking out for yourself. A lot of times, the manager's first priority, as with everyone, is their own careers. So if their priority to their own careers conflict with yours, and you realize they're not looking out for you, then and it's okay to change jobs. People do it all the time. Just because you've been with a company for 2 years or 20 years, it doesn't matter. At some point, you need to look out for yourself. So yeah, I've had a manager that was more that in that situation, he did not want to advance me because of office politics. He was in a different location and he was favoring the people in that location. And I realized that was not beneficial to myself. So I looked out and I got another job with a different company that worked out much better. So it really is, again, take a step back and realize, go back to the previous question, a step back can mean 2 steps forward in the future.
Yeah,
so if
I like that.
They're looking out for you, time for you to look out for yourself.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And it kind of goes back to the mentorship thing, right? You might be teaching them how not to manage people very well. But at minimum, if nothing else, you're learning the kind of management that either does not work for you or the kind of manager you don't want to be. That was one of the biggest takeaways I had. And you're right. It like my mindset and a lot of like the attitudes I was having towards the situation really changed when I remembered that people are not anti-you. They are pro themselves. So just because somebody's out for what they can get or they're very focused on their own success does not mean they don't want you to succeed, does not mean they are actively or passively trying to make you not succeed. Doesn't mean they're not, but so I like that idea to remember, you can still be pro you even if nobody else looks like they are. That's good. Okay, one more question here. I want to know if there's any way that we can try and tell if a potential employer is going to support and encourage career development. So if you're in that interview scenario and you're trying to figure out, is this going to actually be a good fit? Is this someplace I'm going to get managed well? Or is this someplace I'm going to get supported and encouraged to grow? Are there questions that y'all have asked? Are there questions, Jamar, that people have asked you in the event, during these interviews? Guy, let's go to you first, and then Jamar will go to you.
Yeah, I just have and I've done that before. It's very simple. Just ask for previous experiences from the hiring manager. When you are in an interview with the hiring manager, just ask, how have you supported your employees? How have you, manager, helped them grow their careers independent from this specific position? And
That's
then you can gauge the response. If the response is just very, very by the book, it doesn't have much content to it, then you can see that they're only looking out for themselves and their project and not the people. So really just be honest and ask. The worst that can happen is you get a bad response.
That's true.
Yeah. The other question to ask beyond just the manager is like, what is the actual, do you all have a career development pathway? Do you have a career development plan at this organization? Any organization doing their work is going to have a plan. And if someone, maybe the person you're talking to doesn't know it, if someone in the organization cannot illustrate that to you, that is probably a place that maybe it can still be a good fit for you depending on what you're trying to get out of it. But if you are focused on I need a place to grow and develop, if that is not able to be articulated from an organizational standpoint, not just from the hiring manager, you're probably not going to get what you want out of that experience. So again, to Guy's point, ask, do not I know it seems perfunctory at the end of interviews, oh, please ask us questions. Ask those questions, ask the hard questions, make the hiring manager, whoever else, feel accountable to you. You are a candidate, you are important, people are coming to get you. They should be able to answer those questions honestly. And if they aren't able to, and maybe they're able to answer honestly, hopefully they're able to answer it honestly. The answer that you get should inform how you yourself move forward with that organization.
Exactly. Just one more thing to add based on Jamar's response. Don't forget that even though they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them.
This, y'all, listen to the man.
It's not a life or death situation. Not unless it is, you need the job. But most of the times you can walk away from a job offer.
Yes.
If you're not feeling it, you are also interviewing them. And it's much, much easier and much better to walk away from an interview or a job offer than it is once you're actually in the job.
Yeah.
So yes, you're also, a lot of times interviews don't leave that many time for questions, which sucks. So you need to be very cognizant of that. And you can actually have follow-up questions. I've done that. I've mailed the questions in the end, and you will see if they respond or not. And if they don't, that's a red flag. You are also interviewing them. You have power.
I also think
I like this.
If an organization, I know like it can be really annoying to interview somewhere where they have like 5 or 4 rounds of interviews, but that also indicates like thoughtfulness. That indicates that like they want you to meet multiple people. That means like don't just ask the direct hiring manager that question, but ask people who have been managed by them or who work directly with them what their career path and their career growth has looked like. To Guy's point, like you're interviewing them, so like think of the 5 rounds as your opportunity to ask 5 rounds of questions. And I have instances where I have asked for like follow-up meetings, follow-up like one-offs. I have had, I've actually really appreciated hiring or like interviewing folks who then ask me to like do a follow-up with just them because they have additional questions about what it means to be a woman of color at the organization. So I think like, take the opportunity. Generally, like people want to hire the right folks. So the more questions you ask, the better that looks. So like ask a lot of questions.
Yes, I like this. And like y'all have been saying, like ask the questions and then listen to the answers. The answers are important, but like if you're asking, like, do y'all have ERGs at your company? And they don't. Are they answering in a way that makes you think they would really rather you hadn't asked this question? Or are they answering in a way that's like, you know what, we don't, but we're very interested in starting these kinds of things and we need grassroots support from our employees. So maybe this is something you'd be interested in doing with us should you join the team. So I think that's, really important to interview them right back and listen when they answer questions, because even no answer is an answer. It tells you something. I like this. Okay, we are almost out of time today. I wanted to make sure we touched on a couple of these, key points about Murmuration and about how y'all feel about the team. Guilherme, you had said you would describe the company culture as compassionate. Can you illustrate that for us?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also goes very in sync with what the company does, which is to look out for kids in schools. But also, I really like that here, if you have a personal problem or if you just have a personal reason or a career, people will step in and help you. And that's something I gleaned into during the interview process. And I try to show that when I'm interviewing others. And it really is, don't forget, we are all human beings. Even though we might be numbers on a spreadsheet as a resource, we are all human beings. So if you can keep being compassionate about that fact, we'll all just lift each other up and increase our productivity, increase the work that we do. So that is something I really enjoy about working here.
I like that. Cristina, I'm going to go to you next. And obviously, so apologies, y'all. We got to keep it quick so we can stay on time, respect everybody's calendars. Your favorite part about working at Murmuration is the opportunity for continuous learning. What's the most recent skill or most recent thing that you've learned via working at the company?
My job is ever changing. So all the time, but I would also say like, I meant this from like an organizational perspective where I think that like the org itself is constantly in touch with what's going well and what do we need to do more of, or what do we need to do less of. So it creates an opportunity for, individuals to continue learning. But I think what it really does is show that the organization itself from a strategic perspective can be very reflective to what needs to change.
Excellent. All right, Jamar, last but not least, your top tip for someone who's interviewing, is this Murmuration specific, or do you think that this advice applies no matter where you're applying?
It applies to everywhere. And to get more Murmuration specific, like we value like openness. We like the organization itself, like it's just a very open organization, like from top to bottom, of just like the amount of communication that people have, whether you're at a chief level position or not. And so I think the more, if you're interviewing, like the more honest and like open that you're able to be about just like what you're thinking about, what you've gone through, what you've learned, it's just going to like resonate so much more with a team that embodies that type of culture.
There we go. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that is absolutely super useful information for all of us who might be looking at job interviewing, sooner rather than later. I do just want to take a second here to say thank you to each of you, Jamar, Guy, and Cristina. for sharing your time and your knowledge with our community. And I want to obviously thank Murmuration for making this event possible. To our fellow community members, I want to say thank you once again for joining us. I really encourage you to follow Murmuration on their Power to Fly page. It's that big pink button at the top right-hand corner of the screen says follow. That'll help you stay up to date on their open roles, benefits, and more fun events like this one. Now, if this was your first Power to Fly event, I hope you had a fabulous time and you cannot wait to join us for another. If you are one of our frequent flyers, I love seeing familiar names and faces. I cannot wait to see y'all on the next event as well. Have a great rest of your Monday. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and we'll see y'all later. Bye.